The paper trembled in my mother's perfectly manicured hands, but her voice didn't. She looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before. "Sign it, Natalie," she said, her tone as sharp as a razor. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and betrayal. My father didn't look at me. He stared at the contract instead, sliding it closer across the polished mahogany table like it was nothing more than a dinner bill. It wasn't just paper. It was a termination agreement. My job, my equity, and my entire future were meant to vanish with one single signature. "If you don't sign," my father said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the table, "you're choosing to walk away from this family." My chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. He wasn't talking about the company. He was talking about my life. And just like that, I realized this had never been about business. It was about choosing him over me. My younger brother, Tyler, leaned back in his chair, arms folded over his chest. He was wearing the same smug expression he'd had since childhood whenever he knew he'd won something he hadn't earned. "This is what's best for everyone," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. Everyone. He meant everyone except me. He had been our chief operations officer for exactly 9 months. I had been the director of project development for 6 long years. That was 6 years of 70-hour weeks and missed holidays. I had spent 6 years earning the trust of clients that he inherited overnight. I stared at my parents, waiting for one of them to hesitate or show a flicker of guilt. Neither of them moved a muscle. Neither of them looked away. And that silence hurt more than the contract sitting on the table. They were handing my life's work to a boy who had never finished anything. My name is Natalie Whitmore. I'm 32 years old, and until that night, I truly believed loyalty was enough. Whitmore Construction was my family's legacy. My grandfather built it from nothing but grit and sweat. My father expanded it into something bigger, and I was the one who stabilized it when the economy turned sour. At least, that's what every foreman and vendor told me in private. In public, however, things were different. I was always introduced as Tyler's older sister. I was never the lead negotiator or the reason the company had survived its worst years. I was just the daughter, the sister, the quiet shadow in the background. I didn't realize how replaceable they thought I was until they tried to replace me. I had poured my soul into those buildings, thinking I was building my own home. I was wrong. I was only building a throne for a brother who didn't care. Tyler had never stayed long enough anywhere to fail properly. He was a professional at quitting before things got hard. He left college halfway through his senior year because he was bored. He tried real estate for a few months and quit when he didn't sell a mansion immediately. He opened a luxury gym with a massive loan and closed it within a year. Then he started a logistics startup that burned through my parents' retirement savings like dry wood. Each time he failed, my parents called it finding himself. They viewed his disasters as growth. When I worked every single weekend for 3 years, they didn't call it dedication. They just called it expected. I didn't resent Tyler for being lazy. I resented my parents because they never saw the difference between his chaos and my order. They loved his potential more than my reality. Now, they were betting the whole company on a person who couldn't even manage a gym. 3 years earlier, Whitmore Construction had nearly collapsed into bankruptcy. A major commercial client pulled out of a massive deal. Our cash flow froze instantly. Vendors stopped trusting us and refused to deliver materials. I was the one who spent nights on the phone negotiating payment plans. I was the one who sat in dusty offices and convinced 2 major developers to stay with us. I was the one who rebuilt our credibility brick by brick. My father had cried in his office after we signed the recovery deal. "You saved us, Natalie," he'd said, clutching my hand. "I don't know what we would do without you." I believed him then. I thought saving the company meant I was a part of it. But I was learning that saving something doesn't mean you own it. It just means you are a useful tool until the next favored person wants to play with the toy you fixed. The promotion happened without any warning or internal discussion. "We're restructuring leadership to face the future," my father announced during a crowded Monday executive meeting. I sat at the table, my notebook open, ready to discuss the new bridge project. Then he placed his hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Tyler will be stepping in as our new chief operations officer, effective immediately." Everyone in the room clapped politely, though I saw the confusion in the eyes of the senior engineers. I clapped too, my hands feeling like lead, because no one else in that room knew what I knew. Tyler didn't understand operations or logistics. He didn't know how to read a structural blueprint or a balance sheet. He only understood attention and the power of his last name. My parents understood something else entirely. They understood denial. They thought that by giving him the title, he would magically become the man they wanted him to be. It didn't happen all at once. The erasure was a slow, agonizing process. First, Tyler started attending my private client meetings. He would sit there and nod while I did the talking. Then he started leading them, talking over me and making promises we couldn't keep. Soon, I stopped being invited to the meetings altogether. Important emails stopped including my address. Major decisions happened behind closed doors without me. One morning, I walked into the conference room and realized my usual seat at the head of the table was gone. It hadn't been moved to the side. It was just gone. There was no space for me in the room anymore. That was the exact moment I knew this was intentional. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a calculated move to push me out. They wanted me to be a ghost in the company I had literally saved from the brink of death. "Don't make this difficult, Natalie," my mother told me privately later that week. We were in the kitchen, and her voice was soft and careful. She sounded like she was managing a delicate situation, not talking to her own daughter. "Tyler needs room to lead. He needs to feel like the boss." I stared at her, my heart breaking in my chest. "I built half those client relationships from scratch," I told her. "I know the project details better than anyone." She smiled gently, the kind of smile you give a child who is overreacting. "And Tyler will carry them forward beautifully," she replied. She said the word, carry, like I was already a memory. Like I was a heavy weight he was finally taking off her shoulders. I realized then that she didn't care about the projects. She only cared about Tyler's ego. I was the obstacle in the way of her son's fake success. The clients started to notice the change in the company. One of our oldest and most loyal partners, Michael Davenport, called me directly on my cell phone. "Are you leaving the firm, Natalie?" he asked. The question caught me completely off guard. "No," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm still here." "Why do you ask?" There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Michael was a man who valued directness above all else. "You've always been the reason we stayed with Whitmore," he said. "Without your oversight, I'm not sure I trust the new direction." I didn't know whether to feel proud of his words or afraid of what they meant. If the clients were worried, the company was in trouble. But if I told my father, he would just accuse me of sabotage. I was trapped between my loyalty and the truth of their failure. The dinner invitation that night wasn't spontaneous. I should have known better when my mother called. It was a staged event, a final act in their play. The contract was already printed and sitting there. They hadn't invited me to talk or to find a middle ground. They'd invited me to surrender my rights and disappear. "Sign it," my father repeated, his voice echoing in the quiet dining room. He sounded calm, almost bored. He had already accepted the outcome of this night before I even arrived. He had decided that I was the problem and Tyler was the solution. He just needed me to catch up to his reality so he could go back to sleep with a clear conscience. I looked at the legal language on the page. It stripped me of my equity and my non-compete. It was a total wipeout. They were asking me to sign my own professional death warrant for the sake of family. "You'll regret this, Natalie," Tyler said quietly from across the table. He wasn't angry. He sounded certain, like a prophet. "You don't understand how much you're walking away from. You'll be nothing without this name." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the expensive watch my father bought him and the suit he hadn't paid for. He really believed that. He truly believed the company was the only thing of value. He thought the name on the building was the source of power. He didn't understand that the name was just letters. The power was the work, the late nights, and the trust one had built with every vendor and worker. He believed the company was the opportunity, not the person running it. That was his ultimate mistake. He thought the chair made the leader. I knew the leader made the chair. I wasn't walking away from my value. I was taking it with me. My hand rested on the expensive gold pen. My entire life was represented on that single sheet of paper. My financial security was there. My familiarity with the world was there. My parents' approval was there. All of it was waiting for a stroke of ink. But I realized something profound in that silent moment. None of it had ever truly been mine. The security was a cage. The familiarity was a lie. The approval was a leash that only pulled when I tried to go my own way. I realized I was already alone at this table. I placed the pen down on the mahogany surface with a firm click. "I won't sign it," I said. My mother inhaled sharply, her hand going to her throat. My father didn't react at all. He just kept staring at the wall. Tyler just smiled, a dark and twisted look. He thought he could break me. He didn't know I was already finished. I packed my office the next morning. I didn't wait for a formal termination letter. I knew the locks would be changed by noon. No one stopped me in the hallway. No one asked me to stay or told me they were sorry to see me go. The office was eerily quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. My assistant, a kind woman who had been with me for years, started to cry as I put my awards into a box. "I don't understand why this is happening," she said, wiping her eyes. I smiled gently at her and squeezed her hand. "It's okay," I whispered, because I finally understood the truth. I wasn't leaving something stable or successful. I was leaving something incredibly fragile that was built on favoritism and ego. I was the only thing holding the walls up. Without me, the ceiling was eventually going to come down. I just had to get out first. The first month of independence was the hardest thing I had ever faced. It wasn't hard financially, because I had saved my bonuses over the years. It was hard emotionally. There were no calls from my mother. There were no messages from my father asking how I was doing. There was no attempt at reconciliation or an apology. It was as if I had been erased from the family history overnight. I spent days staring at my phone, waiting for a sign that I mattered to them. But the silence was absolute. However, something unexpected began to happen during those quiet weeks. I started to feel lighter. I didn't have to manage Tyler's mistakes anymore. I didn't have to seek approval from a man who would never give it. The shadow I had been living in was gone. For the first time, I could see the sun. I was Natalie, not just a Whitmore daughter. 3 months after the dinner, Michael Davenport called me again. I was sitting in a small park, trying to figure out my next move. "I've started a new development firm, Natalie," he said. "I'm moving away from my old partners. I want you to lead my project strategy." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak for a moment. He didn't offer me the job out of sympathy, or because he felt sorry for me. He offered it because he knew my work. He offered it out of a deep trust that I had earned through years of being the only person who kept her word. He didn't care about my last name or my family drama. He cared about the results I produced. This was an opportunity one had earned entirely on my own. It was independent and real. I realized that my reputation was a portable asset. I had carried it out of that office in my heart. Starting over wasn't glamorous or exciting at first. It was quiet and very intentional. I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I was in the office before dawn and stayed long after the janitors left. I wasn't working to prove my parents wrong or to seek revenge. I was working to prove myself right. I wanted to see if I could build something without the safety net of the Whitmore name. For the first time in my life, my success belonged only to me. There was no family name attached to my wins. There was no father to take the credit, and no brother to blame for the losses. It was just me, Natalie Whitmore. I found a strange power in that simplicity. I was building my own foundation now. It was small, but it was made of solid rock, not the shifting sands of family politics. I was finally becoming the architect of my own life. A year after I left, the industry rumors started to reach me. I heard through the grapevine that Whitmore Construction had lost a major hospital contract. It was a project I had started planning before I was pushed out. Tyler had apparently overpromised the timelines to the board. He had wildly underestimated the labor costs and ignored the safety regulations. The client walked away and took their millions with them. It didn't happen because of sabotage or any outside interference. It happened because of reality. Construction is a brutal business that doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't respect favoritism or who your father is. It only respects competence and hard work. Tyler had neither, and the company was starting to pay the price for his arrogance. My parents had protected him from small failures, but they couldn't protect him from the real world. The first crack in their perfect palace had finally appeared for everyone to see. Developers and city planners started calling me directly on my personal line. They weren't calling Whitmore Construction anymore. They were calling me. They trusted my consistency and my eye for detail. They knew that when I said a project would be done, it was done. They didn't want the Whitmore name if it came with Tyler's chaos. They wanted the person who actually knew how to pour the concrete and manage the crews. Every project I completed on my own strengthened something my parents had always underestimated. It strengthened my independence. At the same time, every project I finished weakened something they had always taken for granted. It weakened their reputation. People were starting to realize that the talent had left the building. The brand was losing its value because the person who made the brand work was gone. I was becoming a competitor they never expected to face in the open market. 2 years later, my new firm completed a $48 million commercial complex in the heart of the city. It was a massive undertaking with 1,000 moving parts. We finished it exactly on time and slightly under the projected budget. Major industry publications mentioned my leadership by name in their cover stories. They didn't mention my family history or my father's legacy. They just mentioned me. That was the moment when the shift became permanent and undeniable. I wasn't Whitmore Construction's daughter anymore in the eyes of the world. They were just my former affiliation, a footnote in my biography. I had built a skyscraper of my own, and it was taller than anything they had ever done. My parents had warned me that I would regret leaving their security. But standing in front of that finished complex, I realized I had never been more secure in my entire life. I was my own source of power. Whitmore Construction began to lose their most senior staff. These were people I had hired and trained over the years. They were the backbone of the field operations and the office management. These people trusted leadership stability and clear communication. They didn't follow me because I asked them to. I never reached out to a single one of them. They followed competence. They saw the chaos Tyler was creating. They saw the way my parents ignored the warning signs. They decided to leave before the ship went under. Competence had left the company the night I walked out, and now the rest of the talent was following the trail. Everyone in the local industry knew exactly why it was happening. You can't run a construction firm on ego alone. You need people who know how to build. And those people were all moving toward the light I had created. The house was becoming empty. Their profit margins began to shrink month after month. The projects they did manage to win slowed down to a crawl. Clients who had been with them for decades began to hesitate. It didn't happen in a dramatic, explosive way. It was a gradual, agonizing decline. It was the kind of decay you only notice when it's far too late to reverse the damage. It was exactly how they had erased me from the company. They had done it quietly and with a misplaced confidence. They thought they could survive anything because of their name. They were irreversibly sliding toward the bottom. I watched from a distance, not with joy, but with a somber understanding of cause and effect. They had chosen a son who could only take, and they had discarded a daughter who only knew how to give. Now, they were left with nothing but an empty name and a mounting pile of debt. I was invited to be the keynote speaker at a national construction leadership conference. It was a huge honor and a recognition of everything I had achieved. Standing on that stage in front of thousands of people, I felt a strange sense of peace. When I was introduced, the announcer didn't make a single reference to my family or the Whitmore legacy. He talked about my projects and my firm's growth. Something deep inside me finally settled into place. I wasn't their contingency plan anymore. I wasn't the backup player waiting for Tyler to fail. I was my own foundation. I realized that foundations don't need anyone's permission to stand tall and strong. I had built a life that was entirely my own, and no one could take it away with a signature. My parents were in the audience, but I didn't look for them. I didn't need their eyes to know that I had finally arrived. 3 years after the night I left, Davenport and Company offered me an equity partnership. This wasn't just a job or a title. It was true ownership. It wasn't given to me because of my last name or because someone felt an obligation to family. It was earned through blood, sweat, and undeniable results. I signed that partnership contract without a single moment of hesitation. I didn't sign it because I needed validation or to prove a point to my father. I signed it because I had finally become the person they never believed I could be without them. I was a partner in a firm that was outperforming Whitmore Construction in every single metric. I had found the security they promised, but I had found it on my own terms. My signature now carried the weight of a leader, not the desperation of a daughter trying to please her parents. I was finally home. Industry reports began to refer to Whitmore Construction as a declining legacy firm. That word, legacy, was a polite way of saying they were a part of the past. They were no longer the leaders in the market. Their name had become a piece of history, something people remembered from the old days. My name, however, had become the future of the industry. I was the one being called for the innovative projects and the difficult builds. I never said a word against them in public. I didn't need to. I didn't engage in gossip or social media drama. I just kept working. Results speak much louder than resentment ever could. The market had made its choice, and it had chosen the person who focused on the work over the person who focused on the name. My parents' company was a fading sunset, while my firm was the rising sun. The truth was now public and completely undeniable. They told me I'd regret leaving that night at the dining room table. They warned me that the world was cold and that I needed the family name to survive. But regret doesn't belong to the person who was forced to walk away with nothing. Regret belongs to the people who underestimated what they were losing. It belongs to the parents who traded a loyal daughter for a failing son. I didn't win because they fell or because I destroyed them. I won because I finally had the courage to stand on my own 2 feet. The most powerful revenge in the world isn't destruction or anger. It is becoming completely undeniable. I didn't lose my family's company that night. I lost a cage, and in the process, I found myself without it. I am Natalie Whitmore, and I built this life with my own 2 hands. I don't need their approval anymore. I am finally free.